and hope you enjoyed the keynote from the first day with the Secret Service. It was obviously very insightful for everybody as we get through day one and get started with day one of Cyburgh. And we are going to move on to our first panel. Our first panel is Changing Minds and Attitudes and How to Be a Change Maker for a Secure Supply Chain. So a little bit about the topic to set the stage. So when we talk about changing minds, we are not talking about our other colleagues, even though, I mean, it's good to have healthy discussions, but primarily we're talking about our employees as well as executive teams or the board of our organizations, and how with the changing times we're actually looking at how we can affect change. Supply chain is a little bit interesting for many of us because we think strictly of manufacturing and maybe that we don't really deal with supply chain. But the supply chain part is really a discussion around any integrated part of your environment that we may not control, but is vital to running our business. So obviously with the SolarWinds breach, that was labeled and correctly as a supply chain type of issue. So today we're going to talk about that on the panel. We'll be doing quick introductions on the panel. I will go ahead and go first, and then we will go into the panel. So again, my name is David Kane. I'm the CEO of Ethical Intruder. Just a super quick background. We are a local Pittsburgh-based cybersecurity compliance company. We focus on penetration testing, DevSecOps, and vulnerability management on our technology side, compliance and risk, and building cybersecurity and compliance frameworks. And then on a user side, we focus on phishing, social engineering, and security and compliance training. So we'll go ahead and get started and bring in the panelists and go ahead and get to them and make sure that we can go through and get introductions from everybody. So why don't we go ahead and we will start with Rich Platts from NASD. If you want to go ahead and Rich, introduce yourself, your organization, and a little bit about what you're passionate about in your role related to cybersecurity. We'll go ahead and get started.
Thanks, David. Sure thing, appreciate it. My name is Rich Platts. I am the Director of Technology and Innovation at North Allegheny School District. We're the largest suburban school district in the Allegheny County region. Through my work with our regional colleagues and colleagues around the country, we focus on leadership and professional advancement for folks in a CTO role in the K-12 organizations. One of those focuses is clearly focusing on student safety and cybersecurity for our organizations.
All right, excellent. Move on to Chris Fry. Same thing, a quick introduction, a little bit about your organization and what you're passionate about related to cyber.
Hi, thank you, Dave. My name is Chris Fry. I'm in my 27th year working for compunetix. I am a certified information system security professional, and I am leading both the cybersecurity program for our products as well as for 3 companies. So it's not only compunetix, but also Chorus Call and compunetix. All 3 companies were started and founded by Dr. Giorgio Corlupio, and he's been a longtime supporter of the Pittsburgh Tech Council. Chorus Call provides audio video conferencing services. Compunetix provides electronic assembly, and compunetix also provides printed circuit boards. So these are 3 companies with some unique supply chain concerns, but they also produce a lot of products, and therefore we're a supplier to many other companies.
Okay. And next, Shari, why don't you go ahead and give a little introduction about yourself.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shari Gribbin with CNK Solutions, a member of the ARC Access family. I focus day to day on helping organizations design and implement cyber and supply chain solutions, especially small and mid-size organizations, both public and private sector. I spent the first 15 years of my career in a large power company, helping to, with the same things, and helping to transition the industry from a voluntary construct to a regulated construct. I like to highlight wherever I can for everyone that the grid is heavily regulated for cyber and supply chain security, which is often left out of those hysterical media articles. So just so you know, it's a little bit more secure than people think. And now I work for the last 7 years, I jumped out to work with other industry sectors and especially other critical infrastructures to help take all those lessons learned, which I also highlight because you'll likely hear that theme in some of my discussions today.
Great. Thank you, Shari.
Thanks.
And last but not least, Mark Vescovi, go ahead and give us a quick introduction.
Thanks, David. Mark Vescovi, I work for Liberty Tire Recycling. It's the largest tire recycling company in the world. We have around 50 locations in the US and Canada, ever growing, acquiring other businesses. We manage sort of the full life cycle of the tire once it's taken off of your car at your NTB, Sam's, wherever. We pick them up, we bring them in, we resell them if possible, we grind them up and make other tires. We sell the wire, we sell the rubber for mulch, etc. If your kids have gone to a athletic field and brought something home in the car, rubber pellets, that most likely comes from us. We are, a very green organization. We are private equity. We were actually founded by 3 individuals from Pittsburgh. One of those, for Pittsburgh Steelers fans, was Andy Russell. And he sits in the office right across the way if you're a Steelers fan. So we have unique cybersecurity requirements based on a continual balance of private equity funding and making sure that we don't have any incidents. And we partner very much with David Kane and Ethical Intruder to help provide guidance on where we're going.
All right, great. So great panel. Thank you again all for being here. I'm sure it should be a great discussion. So our first question that we have today is, how have you seen cybersecurity and the threat landscape change over the past few years as it relates to your company's supply chain? And just briefly, again, as I said in the introduction, we're talking about, with the supply chain, products that are probably integral to you doing your business, but you may not always have total control over. And I think we'll go ahead and start with Chris.
Thank you. From us being a contract manufacturer, we have 2 areas of concern. We're a large electronics parts buyer. We procure the largest percentage of electronic goods in Western Pennsylvania. When we had lead times were 4 to 8 weeks to get parts in, now we're seeing those lead times stretch out to weeks, months, in some cases even up to a year. The problem with that is it's created a market for counterfeit parts. And so with counterfeit parts, that becomes an issue for our product. It's not going to work. It's not going to be valid. We've got all kinds of problems with that. So what we've done is we've started partnering with GIDIP. It's the Government Industry Data Exchange Program, GIDEP. This allows us to partner with other industries and with other government entities to ensure that we're sourcing good materials. We're reporting the fact that materials are counterfeit. The other increasing complexity that we've had is with our equipment. We're using a lot of industrial automation, but it applies to printers and fax machines and other things that we use in our offices. Manufacturers of these gear want to use remote diagnostics. They want to calculate supplies. They want to do reservicing. This has created a problem for us. We've done things like segmentation to allow coordinated times, keeping that equipment separate from the corporate environment, allowing it only to phone home at certain times. This will limit our exposure to things like ransomware and other areas that we have. So, we look for programs that we can partner with others in reporting supply chain issues, preventing and providing a sustainable supply chain. And we look to leadership to make sure that they're making those changes, because without leadership supporting this, none of these initiatives work.
Okay, great. And same topic, Shari, a couple thoughts on how things have changed and how it relates to company supply chain from your perspective and experience.
Yeah, sure. I think mine's short and sweet. I've seen a significant expansion and focus on the design and implementation of supply chain risk management programs, formal, documented governing programs and controls to assess risks associated with supply chains and help to mitigate those risks within your existing controls. And there are a lot of great resources out there for folks. CISA has some great material out that's available to help guide people that are trying to do that.
And I'm actually going to ask Rich Platts the same question, even though I know this wasn't the one he was necessarily prepared for. But when I think of North Allegheny School District, one of the things for those of you who have not worked or associated with IT within a school district is it is amazing how many different products and services are tied into a school district in order for the school district to run. And so maybe if you could just give a little bit of insight on, as things change, how you try to, keep up with making sure that your sort of your third party, relationships that you rely on for the technology in North Allegheny, like how do you try to stay on top of that?
Absolutely. Our industry, the education industry, especially public K-12, we're rapidly maturing as a sector from a general technology perspective. I think you only have to look to this year and see the mad scramble of schools across the country as they went from adopting anything that would work to some folks who realized that, maybe a more defined approach to standard digital ecosystem is really important. We're also a fairly lightly regulated industry, although that's changing a lot as states, particularly New York and others, have adopted really strict regulations now, requiring adoption of full NIST protocols. And typically these are applied as unfunded mandates. So they tell a school district they have to do it without necessarily putting funding behind it. Our supply chain does look a little bit different. We have students and teachers, but we also have a whole ecosystem of different products, including a learning management system, student information system, some of which we maintain on-premise, and some of those are cloud partners. So really ensuring not only that we have our internal IT controls in place, but when we are evaluating those vendors, we're asking the right questions about how they are protecting and keeping student data secure, because that's a real priority in schools, is to maintain student safety.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the next topic, which is talking a little bit about what's been in the news. I was just mentioning this morning as the Colonial Pipeline. This really just happened, but things happen so fast in the news cycle, and with cybersecurity, it feels like it's a little bit more than a week or so old. It's amazing what the what that attack did on the Eastern Seaboard, especially with supply of gasoline. And so the question really focuses on, what vulnerabilities do you focus on or think about when it relates to something like the Colonial Pipeline attack, which of course had to do with ransomware? And what are some of the adjustments that companies should make now with their cyber strategy? And again, I'm going to go to somebody who didn't necessarily know he was going to be talking about this, but Mark, you're up next. And you did mention, I think a few moments ago, that there is a focus on ransomware and how to protect against ransomware. And so when you hear about the Colonial Pipeline attack, what types of things does that do internally with the organization to continually focus on protecting against ransomware?
I think the first thing it does is it highlights the importance of that to Liberty, because whenever that actually happened, we have many locations in the Atlanta and the Texas region which were impacted by that. So the business sees firsthand what the potential impact of having an attack on them. And it actually, and I know we're talking about this a little bit later, it makes our lives a little bit easier, because we can highlight that as an opportunity and say, we need to address these particular items so that doesn't happen to us. And in communicating to the business, whenever we can use an event like that to look at the vulnerabilities. And I think somebody said that this morning, never let a good crisis go to waste. We use some of those things to implement new items, like we're doing MFA for VPN. We didn't have that previously. One of the crises that we had was we were up for our cybersecurity renewal, and none of the vendors would quote us unless we actually had MFA for VPN. So that gave us a really strong business case to say, okay, we're turning this on the end of the month. I know that we generally would, have a big rollout and wait for people to get ready for it, but it was a nope, Tuesday we're doing it, a quarter of the group. Wednesday we're doing a quarter of the group. Friday we're doing a quarter of the group. Monday we're going to be done. We're going to have this rolled out. So those type of things enable us to do to change in a way that the business probably wouldn't approve had that not have happened.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's some great insight, Mark. And it is maybe not something we always think about, but as you brought up and they said this morning, I think there is an opportunity when things are in the news cycle, especially as we, and as you said, we'll talk about this a little later, socializing things internally to help, to help discuss the points. So I think that's really smart. And then a quick note too, which, later on, if anybody else wants to jump in about it at some point, that I think is important is when you talk about supply chain and your partners, Mark is right. The cyber liability insurance world is making a lot of changes. And if you're not already protecting the way that you communicate with your partners, you receive data, making sure that you have vendor management programs, your cyber liability insurance company is probably going to do it for you. So again, that may be, as Mark said, another reason to go to executive teams and others and push for some of these pieces. You do not want to have to scramble when it's time to renew your cyber liability insurance if you don't have to. Shari, I think we were going to ask you as well. I mean, related to the Colonial Pipeline, and as you said, you worked on the grid, previously and have some expertise there. But when you hear about this attack, what are some of the things that come to mind about what maybe people should be doing now with their cybersecurity strategies?
I'd like to start with saying how great it was to hear Mark say they monitor this stuff and jump on those opportunities. I don't remember if I mentioned in my intro, but I was both a lawyer and business lead in my prior life. So I look for any chance to advocate for an enhanced business case and bring these types of critical initiatives that IT and cybersecurity teams are trying to elevate to leadership to their attention and get the support to get them implemented. So monitoring what's going on and getting information about what the vulnerabilities were is a great start for getting your cyber and IT teams supported in what they're trying to get accomplished to secure your own systems. With that in mind, one of the challenges, of course, is getting enough information about these, because most companies are pretty guarded about what they release just for everybody else's insights. The Biden administration is pretty focused on helping to expand that. From the lessons learned side, I would just say that two big lessons I never miss an opportunity to convey are that everybody thinks that they've got fantastic controls, or at least good enough ones in place. And the first thing you learn when you have to prove those controls are working because you're now regulated is you're not doing nearly what you thought you were doing. They're probably not all working the way you intended. And one other big thing that you learn is that those frameworks that you've adopted, like NIST and ISO and C2, M2, and any of these, are deliberately designed with a level of flexibility and vagueness that doesn't tend to provide the specific guidance when you have to turn those into something as an industry that you can actually operate to and prove you're doing. You find there's a whole lot of room to improve the direction you're giving in your controls. So my advice would be to look at what you're implementing, look for the updated and additional guidance, which I know is a bit overload. It's pouring out all the new updates, but try to get on top of some of that. And then to look at what you've designed as processes and controls for all the ways that that may be more vague than you think in terms of guidance within your organization. Talk to people that don't do what you do for a living. Talk to people that aren't in IT and cyber and see if they understand it, and then improve those. And you'll be ahead of the curve if regulation does come down, like Rich mentioned, as that begins to get a lot more attention.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Shari. I think you brought up some really great points and nailed it on the head. So when you look at controls, most companies will tell you, or large companies, that they have a backup and recovery plan and disaster recovery plan. But every time you hear that somebody had a ransomware attack, there was some part of that that possibly wasn't 100%, because if they were able to recover immediately and had certain systems in place, there are a lot of attacks where you don't hear about them. And I think, we get asked a lot, what's the next thing we should spend money on and we should buy or we should monitor? And all of those things are extremely important. Keep doing it. But looking at your existing controls and making sure that you have your incident response and your disaster recovery in place, that you train on them. I think this year there's been an incredible increase in incident response tabletop exercises where you're actually practicing the muscle memory of how you react to this. I think it's really important. So those are some great insights.
Can I just add on that one thing?
Sure.
For those who don't know, because I'm tracking all the outflow of administrative, regulatory initiatives, policy, everything coming out of state, federal, and the Biden administration. That is a very common theme across all of them. They want to see heightened approaches to incident response and drilling and all of that. So you're dead on that people need to focus on that, and more than one a year and more scenarios than one.
Yeah, so to that point, for anybody who has ISO or high trust or SOC or NIST or CMMC, there's typically 3 levels that you're looking for every year with incident response. It's reviewing the policy and updating the policy, having the training, and then also doing incident response tabletops. And that's across all of the compliances. And to your point, I think as there's more regulation, that's going to become more common. All right, let's move on to sort of the other part of what we were going to talk about. And Rich, we're going to go back to you. So what are some of the best practices? I know you've brought this up a little bit and the panelists brought it up, but what are some of the best practices to ensure buy-in from the company, management, and that school board? I know that's a lot to navigate.
Absolutely. I think telling a compelling story is a really important part of this, and it's maybe something that can sometimes be outside of our skill set and comfort zone in this space. But talking about those risks and what could happen, Mark stole it from right out from under me, the never waste a good crisis, Churchill. And, preferably someone else's crisis, never waste someone else's crisis so you don't have to have it yourself, and really focus on what that could look like if it were us. Almost every school district in America has a student safety goal that is core to their strategy. And typically it's been a brick and mortar security focus. And so working with the leadership and making sure that you can transform that brick and mortar mentality into this cyber world has been a really key part of how we've extended an existing conversation about student safety into the cybersecurity component. Schools are not generally very well equipped to do this on our own, so we rely on outside partners to help us to bring in expertise. Not being very well equipped for it doesn't really prevent us from being really big targets. And we see annually more and more schools, especially in the summertime when school districts are rushing to get ready for the next school year, being attacked and put into that situation where they have to pay the ransom or they have to just get things moving so that school can start. So transparency with the leadership team, sharing that news stories and statistics, and training them first before you roll out that training to the rest of the organization has been really key to developing leadership that can lead by example.
Excellent. No, that's great. Chris, tell us a little bit about what it's like to talk to leadership and try to move the needle on things that will help out with the security landscape.
Well, as I had said, I'm dealing with 3 companies that I'm attempting to get 3 different senior management teams all on board with as we attempt to roll out one cohesive plan across the 3 companies. What I've learned is that you've got to, one, break this down into non-technical terms. All too often, we as cyber professionals start thinking in terms of, vectors of attack and the latest ransomware technology and things. Most of these folks that we're dealing with in that C-suite are not the individuals who have that background or that appreciation for that kind of detail. So we have to make sure that we're selling this in a way that they can understand, that it's at a high level, that they understand what the business case is for it. I always like to, as we were saying here, use the headlines as a springboard to propose change in the company. But I think it's also important to come back around and when to give praise to that management team when you've got something in place that's going to protect you from that, because they want to know, gee, this was just in the headlines. Is my company going to be next? If you can go back and say, hey, remember last year when we invested in this technology or this product or this piece of plan we rolled out? That allows them to say, hey, I want to thank you for that because that's what's keeping us from having to be that next headline there. So I think not only do we all too often we're seeing, I need more budget, I need more funding, I need more material, I need more stuff, I need to have people do different things. Sometimes we need to step back and remember to thank them for what they have done already and that, encourage that, we're doing the right things and we're heading in the right place.
All right, great. So Mark, I know you already touched a little bit on how to work with sort of the leadership team, and as you mentioned, financial interests in the company as well. Any other insights either in that area, or maybe you could help us also lead into the next topic in addition to management, is how do you socialize some of this as well with the actual users when there's a security change?
Thanks, David. And I think Chris hit some of it on the head. It's really communicating to the users and to management in a context where they understand, what are the business implications of it? What are we seeing from a metrics perspective that either proves that what we put in place are successful or drive us to additional funding or investment to protect us. And one of the things that we did with Office 365, whenever we implemented MFA, the users all know, that's a pain in the butt. Every time that they have to go on to, another device or something else, they have to get a code and enter that code or approve on their phone. So they're naturally reluctant to do it because it impacts them, right? But we share statistics that we get from Microsoft that X number of people in the last 30 days have tried to log on to your account from countries that we know that you've never visited or would have any reason to go to. Also, you get all of these improbable travel notifications from Microsoft. Hey, you logged on in South Carolina and then you tried to log on from Dubai within an hour of each other. We don't think this is you. So we share those statistics with the users, and those are things that they would never think of. Right? I mean, they're sitting there thinking, who in their right mind is going to try to log into my Office account from Dubai or other places? So it just sort of opens the eyes to the end users to understand what the threats are out there. And I like Chris's, you got to go back to senior management and say, here's the things that you've done in the last 6 months, year, whatever, that helped us enable us to be more secure. And I'll just use one thing, whatever we all went, and this isn't necessarily related to cybersecurity, maybe it's just tangentially, but whenever we had the work from home and everybody had to move home for COVID, our CEO today and many of our users are like, that happened like that. It was one day we were here, it was another day we were at home. We didn't miss a beat. And that is a result of the investment that we made, not like a month prior to that or whatever as a reaction. That's the investment that the board enabled and the CEO enabled in the months leading up to that for Office 365, additional infrastructure, all of the things that we said were necessary. And what I think that further does is it sort of legitimizes the decision making that you have moving forward, because now all of a sudden you said, you know, I'm making the right decisions. You don't necessarily have to fourth quarterback me on this stuff. Trust me that I'm doing what's financially right for the company and what's going to protect us. So those things I think all sort of fit together. And if you do them all, then you're going to be successful.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mark. So I do want to move on to the next topic, but before we do, Chris, Rich, or Shari, any quick, short anecdotes about, again, how to sort of socialize all this with users when, you know, they're faced with something that seems like it's more of a pain or something that they don't want to do, or it's going to be an inconvenience. How you handle that?
Sure, I can jump in on that one. We've yeah, I think Mark and I must have the same cybersecurity partner, because we have some similar strategies that I'm hearing. So, you know, having open and honest and frequent communications with those users. We have a lot of stakeholder groups here in the school district. We have a number of different bargaining units that we work with. So we have those labor groups that often require that additional proactive communication. And I did the same thing with that group. I slid the sheet of paper across the table with each one of their the leadership's you know, out of country or impossible travel reports. And it was pretty eye-opening. It said, oh, this is somewhere where I could be the vector. And that really helped to garner a lot of support for some of the changes. Also pairing that inconvenience of the multi-factor authentication with something like improvements like single sign-on. So while we are reducing, we're creating this additional step, we're also eliminating a number of additional usernames and passwords that are required to maintain. And so we can kind of take those parallel steps, and maybe in the end it evens out. And then I think finally, just there's a data culture, I think, that we've worked to implement, where it's expected that we have limitations on and segmentation on the data that folks can access. I think historically in schools, it was simple to say everyone in the front office can get access to everyone in all the buildings because it's convenient to manage it. And we no longer do that because there's a real rationale behind segmenting that out, and folks understand why we're making these decisions, even if it makes changing things a little less convenient for them.
Great. So
can I just add one thing? Did I know? I just want to jump in just to take us all, because we're immersed in this, take us all back to the 1,000 foot. We are operating and doing things that are in headlines every single day. Everyday people love to be a part of cybersecurity knowledge. So if we can take some of the things that we know are more important for people to know and boil them into a few things that relate to their everyday life, just have regular old conversations with people about cybersecurity to make them a part of the culture and the team.
Okay, great. So let's move on to our second to last question. So we'll try to keep the answers a little bit shorter, but it's been tremendous insight. And then we're going to go in, and I believe have time for some Q&A. So Shari, let's stay with you, since you were. Your vocals are the freshest from just talking. How do you ensure, or how should companies ensure that their vendors are on the same page with cybersecurity? And so again, this goes to vendor management, this goes to supply chain. You know, you shouldn't allow someone to have access to your systems that follows any standards, you know, less than you already have. So what are the good practices to sort of assure that vendors are practicing the same level of security as your own organization?
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of tried and true, but I'll start with some that we can focus on enhancing contract terms right out of the gate. the language that you put into any RFP for a vendor sets the tone and expectations, and those should be translated into any agreements with those vendors and suppliers that says this is what we expect from you. And they should include a suite of cybersecurity, access management, behavioral training, all kinds of controls, basically many of the ones you apply within your own organization. So that's for starters. You need to set the expectations, and you need to build into your agreements and terms the ability for you to actually enforce those and to audit and to assess compliance to those. There are going to be limitations to how much access you have to people 2 and 3 tiers down the supply chain, but you can at least absolutely get that going with your tier 1. And then separately, of course, you really need it as an organization, a strong access management program that includes information, cyber and physical security access controls, and covers the bases around what your vendors can and cannot do and how to access. And I'll even tell you personally, for me, for my business, I actually have set a structure that limits how much data or information my teams pull out of any particular environment to mitigate the risk that somebody on my end creates an exposure for my clients. So we request standing up of portals and access to the system that we advise be walled off from other parts of the system if possible. And then we manage that very tightly in how our teams access. But we try to do a lot of our support and work within their system. And then that way we don't have their data or information and don't have access to other areas of their system and vice versa.
No, that's great. And you know, I've noticed a pattern from many of you that while we all have moved to, you know, multi-factor and VPNs, as Mark mentioned, Office 365, it does sound like a lot of what we're talking about is just good cyber hygiene, looking at controls, to Shari's point, looking at your contracts, your relationships, you know, just having those conversations when it's easier up front. It may seem difficult, but it's much easier than having those discussions later on. Chris, I think we're going to look for a short answer from you on this one as well, and then we'll get into our final question before the Q&A. But again, how do you work with your partners to try to assure, and again, you also work a lot with in the government space and have a lot of government customers. So how do you work to assure that cybersecurity measures are, you know, reciprocal between you and vendors?
Well, in many cases, we use an approved vendor listing. So the vendor has to prove to us that they're doing the things in quality and in cyber and things that we want them to be doing. The basics, as you say, basic hygiene. We need to have that from them to make sure that we're dealing with them well. We also pass all that information down in every contract, every PO purchase order we place, everything we do. It's all terms and conditions or appendixes to that are being passed down to those suppliers, so they know each and every time we place an order, we're expecting this. And finally, we make sure that we review these vendors quarterly, make sure they're doing what they say they're going to be doing. Now, we don't go sending out big surveys and digging down into their, you know, here's a 150-page document, please complete this. That's not what we do. But we want to make sure that they're doing the basics and they're still doing those. And if they aren't, we follow those up with corrective action reporting. We make sure we file a piece. They're no longer a vendor until they come into compliance, those kind of things for us. On the other side, as a supplier, we have to answer those kind of forms, and we have to take it seriously to explain what controls we've got in place, what we're doing to protect the product that we're selling and delivering. Make sure that we're delivering a product that's going to be useful and safe and secure in the environment that it's going into. And as you said, several of these are government contracts that we're taking in. They flow down those to us. We continue to flow those down to our potential vendors who are supplying the raw materials to us.
Great. All right, thanks. So I think we're going to go into sort of our final question, but we're also, you know, would love for the audience to ask any questions or prep for the Q&A session here at the end. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, and again, they stretch across several different backgrounds and industries and a lot of great insight, do please go ahead and post those questions into the chat. And then after we go through this last round of questioning, we'll see if there's questions. If not, we will go ahead and continue on with our discussion. So, Mark, let's start with you. Final question before we get into Q&A. What is the most important thing that you feel that attendees of Cyburgh should take away from the panel discussion today?
Well, I think this is one thing that Greg from the FBI mentioned this morning was around there's a whole lot of complexity around this, and you're not going to be able to do it yourself. It's really building the partnerships, reaching out to other companies, other individuals to understand what they're doing, and leveraging that moving forward. If you try to hunker down and do it yourself, you're going to struggle with that, because as everybody pointed out, this is an ever-changing world, and what wasn't a vulnerability or an issue yesterday all of a sudden becomes one today, and somebody else out there maybe already have solved the problem. Utilize that to get up quickly and mitigate the risk.
Great. Okay. Rich, what about you? What would you say from either what you sort of prepared or thought about, or from the direction that the discussion has gone in? What do you think are some of the key takeaways for the audience?
I think that really, for me, maturing in the cybersecurity space is complex, it's intimidating, it's time consuming, but I don't think it has to be done all alone. And just to echo what Mark said, there are partners out there that can help to lighten that load and help to prioritize. And it also doesn't have to be done all at once, right? You can prioritize the most important elements and work on a plan that gets this work done over a course of several months or years, and that's perfectly okay as long as you're continuing to make continuous improvement.
Yeah, just keep moving that needle. All right, Shari, how about yourself?
Well, I'm going to lead with Rich's 2.0 quote, never waste someone else's good crisis, and add there, but for the grace of God, go I. So everyone needs to remember that when they're evaluating those crises. But echo these thoughts that we need, that it's complex. You know, I mentioned I'm in law too. You know, everybody comes to you and says, can you tell me about this? And I have to say, I know nothing about that area of law. Cyber is that complex and diverse as well. There are so many different skill sets that have to be integrated to design good programs, and we need to continue to focus on folding them in, creating a more robust family of those skill sets, and getting them integrated into the culture, and include some of the business enterprise skill sets that have historically kind of operated in silos, like risk, like governance, and quote compliance, who I see as a business partner, not a stick, assurance, you know, those kinds of functions, and getting our cyber and IT folks better at those skills so that they can get what they need out of enterprise leadership and senior management.
Okay, great. Appreciate the comments. Thank you. And Chris, what are your big takeaways that you've heard from others or you've thought of while you were listening?
Well, cybersecurity change is a very large, heavy rock that we need to move. And it's a lot easier rolling it downhill than it is pushing it up from the bottom. So get buy-in from the top. Get your management, get your cyber, get your C-suite folks involved early. Get them involved in the initiatives, get their backing and support, and then it's much easier to get things moved forward within the company. People fall in line. They tend to like to, you know, please the people who are signing the paycheck. So, you know, we'll be a lot easier time to adopt. The other thing is, we are talking about supply chain here. Just will point out that last month, CISA, their Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force, or ICTSCRM, large set of letters there, published 2 resources that can assist. So this came out just last month. It's available free online on their site, on the CISA website. And it allows us to do assessments and trustworthiness of vendors and suppliers. It also has a template for security chain, supply chain risk management. So you can go through and assess your own company, your own positions, or you can use it to assess others who your vendors are, or suppliers to you. So it's an easy form to read through. They wanted to make it lightweight and easier. While it's based on some of the NIST standards out there, it's not the heavy control questions that they're using. They've got it in more of a plain English, yes, no, maybe kind of answers, supply, rationale for it. So it's a way for you to start to assess your own organizations.
Okay, great. So we do have a couple Q&A questions from the audience that I'd like to get to. While many of you right now are working in fairly larger organizations, although Shari, I know that you work with some small businesses, and just for everybody, there's a great question, and it relates to something that I said this morning, which is at Cyburgh, we want to make sure that we can focus on small, medium, and large organizations. So the question is, what advice do you have for a small business or small businesses that are trying to improve their cybersecurity posture? There are a few quick hit things that sort of are universal that will really help to protect them. Anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark, do you want to? I was going to say, I'll start since this was the passion and why I jumped out to help in some cases. Resource constraints are probably the top issue for small businesses and tackling these challenges. They're an issue for everyone, period. But small businesses don't have access to the same number of people and tools that some larger businesses have. So I would say really critical is getting a good assessment of your cybersecurity risks so that you can really understand what the big ones are and prioritize your approaches to tackling them. And then the second is to leverage that there's just so much out there that you can get to right away for free. Leverage those options. CISA and NIST have great guidance tools from assessment through to implementation to help you figure out how to tackle these. And then use your trades and your small business association relationships to potentially get access to additional tools or scaled resources that may be helpful.
Okay. Mark, you want to jump in on that one real quick? And then we've got a couple more that popped up.
Sure. And I would echo what Shari just said and probably build on that to say time box what you're going to do. From the very beginning, say, okay, it's going to take a week, 2 weeks, whatever, to make an assessment. I think if you time box it and prioritize those things, sort of get here's everything that we think is out there, and then do a high impact, low cost, these are the things that we're going to implement assessment of those items. Then you build out a roadmap of the important things. But as everybody said here this morning, if you let it, it will encompass everything that you do. And 6 months from now, you're still going to be trying to figure out what you need to do. Time box it and say, by next Friday, we're going to do this and we're going to have this assessment and lay out that mini plan. Because as Rich also said, bite the elephant one bite at a time. Don't try to do it all. So
one thing that we always tell customers when they ask what's the thing that might be most helpful for them, and we say this across the board to everybody, it really has a lot to do, I feel, with MFA. From a company that does penetration tests and tries to get into people's environments, nothing frustrates us more than multi-factor authentication. It keeps us from getting in. It's a fairly easy thing to do. Anyway, so we have a few more quick questions. So maybe just a quick short answer here, but for any of you, what is the biggest challenge you experience in securing your environment?
I'll kick that one off. It kind of ties back to the last question of small business and small piece. We have several good companies here in Pittsburgh that you can use and partner with to augment your team. So one of the things we had is we didn't have expert knowledge in all areas and all domains. So we utilize resources to help supply that team by, buying consulting from an MSP. We have, several here in Pittsburgh, and we have several you can talk with in the networking sections, perhaps.
All right, great. And And that question, by the way, was from Jake Bardo. I think somebody else is about to jump in. I just want to mention, I want to thank Logan Villela for the first one. Did somebody else want to jump in on that?
Sure. I was just going to mention, it sounds like a lot of us have had similar experiences where we either enter a new organization and have a lot of legacy issues. And I would say not to be afraid of doing that initial evaluation and figuring out where the real problems lie. I would expect that if you do a vulnerability assessment, you will expect to see some things that will raise your eyebrows and make you concerned. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. The only way you're really going to know about those is to go through this process, even though that initial sort of shock can be a little overwhelming. But one step at a time, it can be, resolved.
Makes sense. Two more quick questions. We'll see if we can get them in. The next question comes from Sam DeLynn, who, unless there's another Sam DeLynn out there, he is the head of the U.S. Navy's Capture the Flag team that actually just entered the first global armed forces Capture the Flag tournament through SANS, and actually he was the leader of the winning team. So interesting to get a question from Sam. Nice to see you here. So his question is, how can we ensure that the Colonial Pipeline hack isn't going to be to the gas line pipelines what the Anthem breach was to healthcare? And I think the idea here is that very often you wait for a big hack to happen within your industry before there's a push for better security. Can we implement it ahead of time? And maybe even for other industries, is this going to be a wake-up call to really look at what they can do to improve their infrastructure? Anybody want to?
Yeah, I'll say you can't ensure it. Almost always takes that, but if you really care about doing that, you'll take a lot of the advice that was given today and get ahead of this. I would argue also that the more you do now and the better you are at understanding what you're doing versus what you're not and what you can do so that you can lay out a strategic view and approach, the better chance you have of mitigating massive regulation applied to your industry, which is already, of course, being talked about all over the federal space for oil and gas now because of these issues.
Okay, great. And we have a final question, which is just real quick, everybody. You can, if you have one, you can shout it out, and then we'll wrap things up. But what is currently your favorite and most meaningful buzzword related to cybersecurity? A couple examples are work from home and zero trust, and I think we'll hear more about that for sure as we go through this conference. But any big buzzwords going on right now from anybody? Just give us the buzzword that seems to.
MFA.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
Mine is risk-based solutions. You can't gold plate your system.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of things that we are hearing now. So I think we're right at 11 o'clock, which is the end. And it looks like, yeah, we had a pretty good session. I appreciate all the panelists for joining and sharing all of their tremendous insights. Hope everybody's enjoying Cyburgh, and we'll go ahead and I think kick it back to Monica.